Imagine an African general who made all of Europe panic. A leader who single-handedly built an empire from scratch and then fought off one of the world's most powerful colonial armies for nearly 2 decades. This isn't a fictional hero from a movie. This is the true story of Almamy Samori Touré, a name that colonial powers tried desperately to erase from history. His story isn't just about resistance, it's about genius, strategy, and a will so strong it shook the foundations of an empire. So, who was this man, and how did he manage to hold back the tide of colonialism when so many others failed? Let's travel back to the mid-19th century in West Africa. This was a time of immense change and turmoil. European powers were carving up the continent, drawing lines on maps that ignored thousands of years of history, culture, and established kingdoms. But in this era of conquest, and power was rising from within Africa itself. This was the Wassoulou Empire, and its founder and leader was a man named Samori Touré. Born around 1830 in what is now Guinea, Samori wasn't born into royalty. He started as a simple dialect trader. But his life took a dramatic turn when his mother was captured in a raid. To free her, he offered his services to her captors and entered the world of warfare. It was here he discovered his incredible talent not just for fighting, but for leadership. He didn't just learn how to fight, he learned how to inspire. He gathered followers, united various small states and chieftaincies, and through a combination of brilliant diplomacy and military skill, he forged the Wassoulou Empire. By the 1870s, his empire was a major force in West Africa, stretching across parts of modern-day Guinea, Sierra Leone, Mali, and Côte d'Ivoire. But this rise to power put him on a direct collision course with another expanding empire, the French. The French colonial project was relentless, and they saw Samori's powerful, independent state as a major obstacle to their ambitions of controlling all of West Africa. They expected a quick, easy victory. They couldn't have been more wrong. When the French first came for his empire, they were met with a shocking reality. Samori Touré was not a typical tribal chief with a band of spearmen. He was a military innovator. He understood that to fight a modern army, you needed a modern army. He established a professional, full-time military, with soldiers organized into distinct units of infantry and cavalry. He even had a system of military ranks. More importantly, he armed them. Samori set up workshops to manufacture and repair firearms, and he was incredibly skilled at acquiring modern rifles through trade networks, even from his enemies. His soldiers drilled regularly, learning tactics that were far ahead of their time for the region. He had effectively built a professional fighting force that was ready and able to stand against European troops. But his true genius lay in his strategy. Samori knew he couldn't beat the French in a conventional, head-on battle. They had superior numbers and artillery. So, he refused to play their game. He adopted a scorched turf policy that was devastatingly effective. As the French advanced into his territory, his army would retreat, but not before systematically destroying everything of value. They burned crops, emptied granaries, and poisoned wells. The French army marched into a wasteland, with no food, no water, and no supplies. Their long supply lines became their greatest weakness, and Samori's forces would constantly harass them, picking off patrols and raiding supply convoys. The French soldiers found themselves deep in hostile territory, hungry, thirsty, and constantly under attack from an enemy they could rarely find. His strategy was one of masterful evasion and guerrilla warfare. He used the terrain of West Africa, the mountains, dense forests, and rivers to his advantage. When the French army advanced, Samori and his entire population, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people, would simply vanish. They would pack up entire towns and move, leaving the French to conquer empty land. Then, when the French were overextended and vulnerable, he would strike. His forces would emerge from the mountains or forests, hitting the French columns with lightning-fast attacks before melting back into the landscape. For the French commanders, it was like fighting a ghost. They would send reports back to Paris describing their frustration. They would advance, only to find Samori had relocated his capital hundreds of miles away. They would claim victory, only to be ambushed a week later. This incredible resistance lasted for over 17 years. Think about that. From 1881 to 1898, Samori Touré outmaneuvered, outfought, and outthought the French military. He forced them to sign treaties, which he used as breathing room to rearm and regroup, only to defy them again when they broke their promises. He was a brilliant diplomat as well as a general, playing the French against the British and attempting to form a united front of West African leaders against the colonial invaders. He sent letters to other kings and rulers, warning them that if they didn't stand together, they would all fall one by one. While many were too afraid or short-sighted to join him, his lone stand became a legend across Africa. The French grew increasingly desperate. They poured more troops and more resources into the fight, determined to crush this symbol of African defiance. The war became a brutal, grinding affair. They finally began to gain the upper hand by adopting some of Samori's own tactics and by exploiting divisions among local groups. The constant movement and warfare took a heavy toll on Samori's people. In 1898, after a massive, coordinated French campaign, Samori was finally cornered. A surprise attack led to his capture. It wasn't in a glorious battle, but in a small camp, betrayed by intelligence given to the French. But even in capture, Samori Touré never accepted defeat. The French, fearing he could still inspire revolt even as a prisoner, refused to give him a public trial. They knew his influence was too powerful. Instead, they exiled him to a remote island off the coast of Gabon. It was there, far from the empire he had built and the people he had led, that he died in 1900. The French thought that by exiling him and letting him die in obscurity, his name would be forgotten. They tried to write him out of history, portraying him as a brutal slave trader to justify their war, a narrative that conveniently ignored their own colonial ambitions. They wanted the world to remember African resistance as weak, disorganized, and passive. But they failed. Samori Touré's legacy endured. In the years that followed, his story was passed down through oral traditions, songs, and poems. He became a powerful symbol for the anti-colonial movements of the 20th century. When Guinea finally gained its independence from France in 1958, its first president, Ahmed Sékou Touré, was Samori's great-grandson. He made sure the world would remember the man the colonizers tried to erase. Today, Samori Touré is remembered as one of Africa's greatest military strategists and resistance heroes. His story completely shatters the myth of a passive Africa simply waiting to be colonized. It proves that resistance was strategic, organized, and incredibly resilient. He was a nation builder, a modernizer, and a military genius who held one of the world's strongest powers at bay for nearly 2 decades. He shows us that the history of Africa is not just one of suffering and conquest, but of incredible strength, ingenuity, and an unbreakable spirit of freedom. His name deserves to be known alongside the great military leaders of history, not as a footnote, but as a headline. Thank you for watching. The stories of heroes like Samori Touré are often left out of our history books, but they are crucial to understanding the world we live in today. If you want to discover more true stories of incredible figures from African history, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Let's keep sharing the history they didn't want us to know. See you in the next video.